I adore Nubia, and we're so grateful to have her part of our administration. The state of Utah has really benefited from the work that Nubia has done and her perspective, and the passion that she brings day in and day out to her work. And there are so many other people in this room who day in and day out champion others, and recognize that there are voices that have not been heard, and those voices deserve to be heard. I want to also give a shout out really quick as I get my iPad open here to the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity. Our administration has really tried hard to not just champion women and families and men and anyone who has been left behind, making sure that opportunities are open to all, but to intentionally work with other partners. We can't operate in a silo. Too often, especially in state government, we have our departments, we have our offices, we have our little roles, and it's easy to not look beyond ourselves and to not look beyond our roles and to just focus inwardly. But we have tried really hard as an administration to focus more outwardly, to partner, to see where we can bring synergy, because synergy is much, much, much more powerful than the sum of all the individual parts. And that's what I see in this room today, is synergy, and I'm so grateful for it. I have a few perspectives that I'd like to share today. Dr. Madsen is doing such incredible work bringing light and attention to challenges, very real challenges that women in Utah face. And it's important, it's been pointed out a couple times, it's important to note it's not just women. When women suffer, families suffer, men suffer, we all suffer together. When one isn't able to achieve their potential, we all suffer. So intentionally finding those who need opportunity, who have challenges that need to be addressed, that lifts everybody. And Dr. Madsen has done such an incredible job of shining light on these challenges and bringing people together to create that synergy to intentionally solve our problems. Now, I'm the Lieutenant Governor, as was mentioned. I'm the second woman ever elected to that position. And Thanks, Mom. But before I was Lieutenant Governor, I was a state senator. I was elected to the Utah State Senate in 2012. And when I was elected to the State Senate, I'm a Republican. I'm not trying to bring politics into this at all, just to illustrate a point. I doubled the number of Republican women in the Utah State Senate. We went from 1 to 2. Now, last night, we had a big send-off for Martha Hughes Cannon. Anybody in the room there last night? A few of you. We had this opportunity to send a statue of Martha Hughes Cannon to Washington, D.C. to represent the state of Utah in our nation's capital. Every state gets 2 statues. For many, many years, our 2 statues, Brigham Young and Philo Farnsworth. When my mom found out that Philo Farnsworth, by the way, who is a great guy, very worthy of admiration and honor. But when my mom found out, she's from Idaho Falls, that Philo was one of Utah's statues, she's like, why is Philo's from Idaho? Like, why is he one of Utah's statues? So, but he was born in Beaver, so he's lucky to have 2 states that claim him as their own, right? But we had this opportunity to send a statue of a woman, Martha Hughes Cannon, who did something remarkable in a time where a lot of women were struggling to find any kind of civic voice. Martha was elected to the Utah State Senate in 1896. That's the year Utah became a state. That's the year that Utah women were able to vote once again. They came into the Union, became a state in 1896 with equality enshrined in our state constitution. One of only a couple of states at the time to do that. And she became a state senator before most women in America could even vote. 24 years before most American women could even vote. And that's remarkable. She was the first woman elected to the state senate. 116 years later, I was the 27th woman elected to the state Senate. Now, to put it into perspective, we have 29 state senators. I don't know how many hundreds, thousands, I don't know how many people have served in the state Senate over the past 120, I'm doing math on the fly, which is never good, 8 years. But it was a lot more. If you added all of us up when I was elected, from Martha to me, we would not have even been able to fill the 29 chairs in our Senate chamber. So it's been interesting to me to see that while we started out really strong, and we've done a lot of good things, and we've come a long way in many, many areas, the work's not over. We're not done. And what I love about Martha is when she secured that right to vote, when she helped secure that for Utah women, she wasn't done. She wanted to make sure that other women elsewhere in other states had that right as well. And we can learn a lot of lessons from her. Once we have something, we need to make sure that we're seeing others and that we're helping other people get what we have or get what we want. As a state lawmaker, back in until 2021 when I became lieutenant governor, now as the second highest elected official in the state, overseeing all of the state, it's really easy for me to get discouraged by the problems that we see. A bolder way forward is the system-based approach, right? Eliminating silos, working together, solving big problems. But so often we can get discouraged by the problems that we see. How do you solve homelessness? How do you solve women's equality? How do you solve domestic violence? There are so many problems, and it can be tempting to get discouraged by the fact that we may think we're not solving the problems. But let me offer my perspective in a couple different ways. It's okay that you're not seeing an entire problem get solved. An entire problem probably won't ever get solved. Just because women got the right to vote in Utah in 1896 and elected a first woman to be a state senator in the United States doesn't mean that all of a sudden, and we had an Equal Rights Amendment included in our state constitution, doesn't mean that that problem was solved. It means that there was a really meaningful step on the path to solving that problem, on the path to equality. And when I get discouraged about problems, I have to remember that I'm not in charge of solving all of them. But I am in charge of maybe solving some of them. And I do have control over certain things in my life, influence over certain areas. And those are where I need to focus. Those are where you need to focus. Let me give you a personal example. For many years, as a state lawmaker and as lieutenant governor, I've heard about the problem of domestic violence in the state of Utah. In homicides, most likely it's a woman that gets killed, and most likely it's a woman that gets killed by an intimate partner. This is a challenge that we can fix. We can intentionally work on. And it is something that can be eliminated. Will it be? I don't know, but it can be. But it didn't become personal to me until 2022. On August 17th of 2022, my 35-year-old cousin, Mandy, was waiting in Taylorsville at a bus stop for her bus to take her into Salt Lake City to work. It was 5 o'clock in the morning when her ex-husband was hiding in the shadows and stepped out and shot her 13 times. Learning about what happened to Mandy that day was shocking for me. It was shocking for my family. But what was worse was when I found out from the police. That was a Wednesday. That Monday, her ex-husband had showed up to her work in Salt Lake City and harassed her, and the police were called. And he was trespassed, and nothing happened. And then Tuesday, he sent a threat to her employer, threatening to kill everybody if he didn't fire her. And then the police took it seriously, but it was too late. By the time Salt Lake City detectives notified Taylorsville detectives that they needed to take a look at Mandy, make sure she was okay, she had already been murdered. So when I found that out, I thought, you know what? There are problems, there are holes, there are gaps. Let's find out what those are. And what we discovered was this guy had a long, long history of abuse and violence and threats. He was never physically violent to Mandy, but he threatened. And law enforcement always took those threats as an individual case. It's not that bad. That's just who he is. He just talks big. He never acts on it. But there was years and years of history here that law enforcement who were on the scene on Monday morning didn't know about. They also, I found out, didn't ask her the appropriate questions and take her seriously. So what we did was we went around the state listening to law enforcement, to sheriffs, city police, highway patrol. We visited with domestic violence shelters, service providers, judges, prosecutors, and even defense attorneys to find out what we could do better. And what we discovered was some police agencies conducted lethality assessments when they would go to a scene of intimate partner violence. And those are just simple questions to assess how lethal a situation is. But half the police agencies weren't doing that. And I wanted to know why. What were those barriers? And what we ended up doing was last year we passed a law that requires law enforcement to conduct a lethality assessment protocol, a LAP, every time they go to a scene of intimate partner violence. And not only that, but give them the tools to connect the dots. If Highway Patrol pulls you over in Box Elder County and you're not wearing your seatbelt, they may decide to just give you a warning. And maybe you get pulled over again in Washington County another time for not wearing your seatbelt. They can see that you got off on a warning before, and maybe they'll use their discretion to, instead of giving you a warning this time, they'll give you a ticket. Something like that was not in place for domestic violence, for lethality assessments, but it is now. Communication, working together, partnering, observing the challenges, the gaps, the problems, and doing what we can to fix those problems intentionally. We also require now law enforcement. When Mandy, my cousin, was murdered, they found a pamphlet for a domestic violence shelter in her purse. But she was never connected directly with a facility that could help her, to give her resources, to help her understand how to stay safe. But now, law enforcement, if they conduct a lethality assessment and it scores high probability of lethality, they're required on scene to connect them to a domestic violence service provider right then and there. And this has been a game changer. We also provided historic funding. It's not enough, but we provided historic funding. In the last almost a year, it was July 1st that the lethality assessment program started. We have seen over 10,000 lethality assessments conducted throughout the state. 63% of those are coming back as a high risk of lethality. And only 500 of the women or men who have been connected or been attempted to be connected with a domestic violence service provider have denied that connection. Most of them are getting help, or at least getting some information, at least making connections and understanding that there are resources there. This is something that can save lives. But I also recognize this doesn't solve the problem. It's a piece of it. And we're continuing to work on the rest of the pieces. And my message to you today is it's okay to work on your piece, to do your little bit of good, to lift where you stand, and to intentionally work with others to solve problems. And as you do, your eyes will be open to even more challenges and more problems that you can then corral other people in and make them aware of and help them solve. We can't solve problems that we don't see. But once we see them, it is an obligation to do what we can to work towards solving them. I encourage you, as you do this work, in so many areas, we have, I didn't count them, 18? A lot of areas that we need to work on. As you do your part, I encourage you to invite others along. This is a journey that requires everyone, especially right now when we live in a disconnected and a polarized world. Don't give up. Don't get discouraged. Remember, there are more people with you than against you, although the people with you sometimes are a little quieter. We have a lot of work to do, but we have come a long way. We've come a long way since Martha and her friends, men and women, who helped build the foundation that we get to stand on today. But our role now is to secure that foundation and keep building it so that we can hand it off to the next generation and the generation after that and leave this world a little bit better than we found it. Thank you for your intentional work in this space. Thank you for not giving up, for not losing hope. Utah's an incredible place to live in. And while we celebrate, and especially I know the governor and I love to celebrate, we're the #1 state, we're the #1 in all of these areas, and it is true. But we're not #1 in some areas. And we can be, and we intend to be, and we will be with your help. Thank you.